Did you know for the price of a latte, you can get 1 month access to our epic private group chat? Just think, you can have instant connection to other POCFs for 30 days or more anytime you need us. Once you sign up, you have instant access to a diverse group of partners to connect and hear how they overcome their challenges in the industry. Learn how to expand and grow your direct-to-consumer fishing businesses. You get on-demand group support for yourself anytime you need it. You can learn about what's happening outside of your fishing bubble and bond over relatable ways to weather through the hard times. You can learn more about what's happening in fishing communities outside the U.S. and in the U.S. if you're international like some of our members. You can learn from other partners on how to get more involved in your fishery. You'll have a group of peers who are willing to explain terms and other things you might not understand. You have a place to bounce ideas off of. A place to relate to this unique lifestyle, empathize with others, and celebrate the wins. A place to listen and learn and be able to ask questions. A place of genuine kindness, positivity, and friendship. As one member in our private chat said, connecting with others in this lifestyle is not only valuable to me, but it also gives me a feeling of worth in being able to share my experiences and help others. We'd love to have you join. Go to POCFpride.com and select the menu option Sign Up to get instant access today. We can't wait to meet you. 2025 is rolling along, and I hope everything's been going really beautifully for you and your family and your fishermen and your friends and all the people that you love so much. And I love to start the year off by really taking an evaluation of my mental wellness, my mental health, and I feel like what a great way to start the year than prioritizing something that is super important to you, which is your mind, body, and soul. Let's get them all in line here. And, a lot of those aspects have to do with what we consume, whether that's food, friendships that we have. And I mean, even in the last episode, I even went into detail on creating healthy boundaries with friendships and the exact conversations that I had, the uncomfortable conversations, yet conversations that help me feel more confident within myself and feeling like I'm rising into a new Megan and I'm setting new boundaries in a way that's going to help me feel more supported as I move forward into the Megan I'm meant to be. And that's what I want for y'all. And looking out for our mental wellness, like I said, comes in all forms: food, drinks, people, media, and communication, and the information we receive on a daily basis is a huge part of that. As many know, communication is a huge pain point when it comes to POCFs connecting with their fishermen at sea and even at home sometimes. Yet communication is also a really huge challenge between fishing communities, scientists, environmentalists, government officials, and academics to understand each other's goals. And this is where our next guest comes in. I can't wait for y'all to hear this conversation. Gabriela Capestany is a journalist and media analyst based in Charleston, South Carolina. She has a diverse journalistic background, including broadcast TV at King 5 Public Media at Cascade PBS, municipal journalism at Seattle Channel, government communications at Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, and now, wait for this, acting as a journalism and media advisor for the U.S. military and NATO members at the United States European Command. Hello. And on her free time, she picks up freelance work as a cuisine writer for the Charleston City paper. This is where we bonded. As many know, I was a journalist for 11 years, and my first true passion, one of my true first artistic passions is writing. Writing is a core of my career, my will to live. It's saved me through so many difficult times in my life, whether it's journaling or having confessional columns in a local paper like the City paper in Charleston, South Carolina. Ours was called The Sentinel in Santa Barbara, California. And even talking to y'all, whether it's the newsletters, the blogs. I mean, writing is such a huge, beautiful art, and I love celebrating it with you and everyone. And one of my favorite parts about it is talking to other writers and talking about their process. And Gabby's process is really incredible. And I know this is going to be super helpful as we move forward within this new year. If we're advocating for our fisheries and wanting to get more information out to our direct to consumer fishing businesses or just our family and friends to understand really what we're going through and what is behind the seafood and wild caught seafood that they enjoy on their dinner tables or at restaurants or anywhere that they choose to support our community and ingest premier protein for the utmost nutrition for themselves and their families. One of Gabby's gifts is making abstract and complex subjects relatable, making sense of information online, communicating between industry, science, and audiences, and sifting through information online and social media. Woo, right? So freaking valuable. I know Gabby will have some great takeaways for us to learn how to share data and knowledge between our fishing communities, scientists, environmentalists, government officials, and academics to understand each other and reach our common goal for healthy oceans to share with generations to come. Y'all enjoy this episode. This is part 1. Part 2 will be next week, and I'd love to hear what you think. You can reach out on Instagram, DM me, or you can email me at support@pocfpride.com. I always love to hear from you. And of course, if you want to support this podcast, leave a review, super helpful, or follow along. And those downloads really add up, and that helps us get more reach and let people know that we're out here and they're not alone, just like we're not alone. As always, thank you for being here. If you're new, I'm Megan Waldrop. Thank you so much for coming to the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast. This is a great, great first interview for 2025. Y'all enjoy. I'm Megan Waldrop, host of the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast, an extension of an online community for partners to connect and feel less alone. Our podcast invites fishermen, family, friends, and supporters of the industry to learn, laugh, vent, and hear stories about this incredibly unique way of life. What do you say? Let's dive in. Gabriela Capestany, I'm so happy to have you on the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast today. Thank you so much for your time. And I wanted to give a little background on how we met. So I met Gabi at a event in Charleston. It's called Art Muse, and it's a place where creatives from around town can come get out from behind their computer screens and actually socialize with each other. And it was an incredible panel about journalism, I believe, wasn't it? And the written word. Mm-hmm. And so it was at this really cute little brewery in North Charleston. So I go there, I don't know anyone. And I'm like, just, open eyes, looking around. I was like, oh, that girl's cute. She has cute style. I dig it. It's not just fashion. She has style. There's a whole difference. And so I saw her kind of wandering over. I was like, this is my in. I'm going to go ask and see what she's all about. And so I introduced myself and we hit it off. We had a lot of interesting coincidences. We both, love being a creative. We were at this event. We were rocking our dope styles. And then we both learned that we have Spanish Caribbean culture. I am half Puerto Rican and Gabi is a Cubana, beautiful Cubana woman. And we also have journalism ties. So she was talking about how she works or writes for the local city paper in Charleston. It's a weekly paper, one of those very loved papers that y'all have in your town, hopefully. And I was talking about my experience there. Then Gabi says, well, then I also do this job. And Gabi, I would love for you to dive in and tell me what you do. That still blows my mind today.
Yeah, so I am a media analyst for the United States European Command. And basically what that means, if you break it down, is that I am a media journalism disinformation advisor for the U.S. military presence in Europe. So that includes, general people in the military working everyday jobs at the bases, all the way up to the top commanders in charge of the United States European Command, as well as some people in NATO. So if they are U.S. military, sometimes State Department or affiliated, they over there in Europe, they usually get my product. And, it's kind of like a two-pronged approach. One of the things I produce is a summary of the day's news, about 10 to 20 articles that I think if you are going to be in charge of these big decisions that you should be reading if you want to see what the average European or just Western reader is seeing in the news every day. But I do that. And then on the other side, I write an analysis. So kind of takes a little bit the list that I send out, all the articles, a bit more of a broader approach, looks at the tabloids, looks at disinformation, and I write about the good, the bad, and the ugly for them. So they know exactly what people are seeing. And I basically describe it to people, say these people are in classified spaces a lot during the day. And I am like a funnel, I'm there to filter out all the noise, give them the most important points of what people are seeing on a day-to-day basis from an average civilian consumer standpoint.
Wow. I mean, it's so incredible. And I was just, that was probably the one conversation this year that my jaw literally dropped when I was speaking to somebody. It was just so amazing to hear that this job exists and that this fun, bubbly, beautiful woman has a journalist as well, smart journalist, also has this incredible career on the side that you're like, oh yeah, and then I do this. It's super adulting and I love it. And I was thinking, man, this really, really ties in with how commercial fishermen and commercial fishing communities and scientists, environmentalists, and government officials and academics sometimes have challenges when we're communicating to each other. And I'm like, wow,
absolutely.
Gabi definitely does this on a daily basis. And I would love to have her on to tell us advice and try to explain about her job and her career to see how we can learn how to communicate better with each other. So thank you for that nutshell. That was amazing. I'd love to know, how did you get involved in this profession?
Oh gosh, I think at first I was telling everyone I got lucky, but looking back now, I definitely have done the work to get there. I have been in journalism for quite a while I went to the University of Washington. And hear me out. I wasn't crazy. I did triple major though. I kind of just pursued the things I was really passionate about. I knew I was interested in film studies, so there's already like one piece of the media translation part of what I do. It might not seem obvious, but when we're looking at visual images or just translating art in general or things that have mass appeal, that's kind of where one important piece came in. And then one of my majors was communication. That was definitely the one that got me in the door for interviews at different news outlets and such. Having that journalism or communication experience in an academic sense. And then the third major was Danish. That only happened because oddly enough, I'm very into Scandinavian cinema, and the University of Washington has the largest Scandinavian studies department in the US. There's a lot of money that funnels into it from like older Scandinavian generations in Seattle. So there's a lot of scholarships, but not very many people who can take them because it's a really niche area. So I was awarded an academic fellowship to go to Denmark and study over there for a while during my time at UW. And when I came back, they said, hey, you have about enough credits to add this as a third major without doing too much. And I took it. And I think that time over in Europe was so valuable for me to specifically land this job. I have done journalism all around Seattle. I worked for the PBS station there. I've worked at the largest broadcast news station in the Pacific Northwest as a digital content producer, doing about 20 to 30 articles a day. And I've also worked in municipal TV. But being in Denmark and just, being able to use language, be around people who are in Europe and kind of get that cultural, exposure is where it helped me kind of understand European policies, foreign affairs, and also news. So I had that kind of in my back pocket. And so then when I found this job, we were moving to Hawaii, and it was based out of Hawaii, which is very interesting. But it was fully remote. So it was the way it was listed. And it started out only part-time. And I decided, you know what? Like, it was the middle of the pandemic. Here's this amazing job. I thought, I'm like, oh, well, we'll see if I can get this. I had taken a year off when we were in Charleston the first time. I was working at a cheese shop and was really kind of struggling to find something that fit. And I interviewed, and pretty much directly afterwards, I got a call a week later. And I love the woman I was working with at the time. She told me, we want you because you're a massive nerd and you know exactly what this is all about. Like it was just the stars aligned and I had the perfect niche experience to land this role.
Oh, I love that story. It's the synchronicities, the meant to be, the breadcrumbs following that.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're in this place where people, not only that you enjoy, but people really get to benefit from your talents and your skills. And
Yeah.
I want to know what attracted you to this specific role.
Yeah. I think I had been leaning towards the broadcast route for a while. I was kind of between producing a TV slot. Like I think at one point I was going to go into a job where I would have been doing the 4:30 a.m. show, which is a little bit rough. But when you do start out, you know, you have to be flexible with the hours. And I had done a lot of experience in digital content production. What that means in the broadcast world is just writing all the stories for the site. It's a lot of work. You know, you're like the breaking news person. And I knew I was good at that. And I knew journalism was important to me. Where my passions really were was specifically in the rise of disinformation, which I found to be incredibly important. And I knew at some point I wanted to like kind of pivot because you can usually build yourself up in the broadcast world, which is hard work, but if you follow the plan, you know, with your different contracts, you'll get up to a point where you're doing like at a massive, you know, market or near national news. But I knew I kind of wanted to move more into like an analytical kind of side of journalism. And when I saw this, I knew it was for me. I have people, my family, my friends that I've watched have become very susceptible and fallen victims to disinformation very quickly. I think it's something that our country and the world actually should be addressing more closely. Have watched this very quickly for almost a decade at this point, and I knew I wanted to be doing something directly involved with it. And I feel in this role that I'm able to make a pretty big impact, making sure people who are making massive decisions about our country and our country's relations with the whole international community, making them more informed and directly fighting disinformation. So that's what I'm mostly passionate about with my job.
Ooh, that word disinformation, it's just so rich. It has so many
Yes.
layers to it. And I would love, okay, I know we're going to get into this more, but maybe I'm just going to jump around on these questions. But okay, so disinformation. So if I have an understanding, you're able to look at 10 plus resource or news sources to see what the overall public opinion is on a certain topic. And so then are you able to say, okay, so this is what the people are receiving, whether or not this is true or not. And that gives the people, the officials that you're speaking with, a baseline of how to communicate what they are trying to move forward with. Is that correct?
100%. A lot of times, working with, the United States European Command, I actually work probably most closely with their PR team. I'm not in PR at all, but, those are the people that are needing to see the messages. I send my stuff out to everyone, but those are the ones I directly work with a lot. And a lot of times they'll come to me saying like, oh, this exercise is happening. Outside of all the big international stories, they'll let us know about more specific things that they're keeping an eye on. And, I have to let them know, like, this is more a direct thing for the contract I work on. I'm like, is this being talked about at all? And how are people talking about it? Sometimes I have to go to them and say, as excited as you are as about this thing, or you thought it was going to get a lot of traction, it's not getting traction, or telling them when something that is maybe not as good is getting a lot of traction, it's related to them. So there's kind of keeping an eye out for the spin on different things, but also in the way, like, in a broader sense, the way that a message is just being twisted through headlines, because nowadays we don't, our media, and mostly in the US, but also abroad, is consolidated among just a few companies. Even if you think you're reading local news, that's the case. And the way that we need to consume media now has gone from like, okay, just read the news. It's become a lot harder. You have to have like almost a holistic approach to understand how is this being interpreted across the board, and once you know how it's being interpreted across the board from left-leaning, right-leaning, centrist, and more extreme outlets, then you can kind of see where it bubbles up on social media and how bits and pieces are being spun. Because I think what we have a lot of day is like a lot of fragmenting on how information is being spread. You can send out just a piece and it might be factually true, but it also might, the way you frame it might not be factually true. I think, I read a lot about specifically how Russia through the years, even since 1945, kind of the beginning of the Cold War, has been able to do this thing called active measures. And a lot of their belief or their tactic with disinformation is that the best kind of dis or misinformation has a bit of truth to it. You need to make it slightly believable. And that's how it becomes bigger than it is. People are like, I can't fall for disinformation. And that's true. Like a lot of people don't, but almost everyone does. Even the smartest of us will fall for it because, like I said, a lot of it has truth to it.
Wow. And I love that you said even on a local level, even with your local news, because in my experience as a journalist, it's been interesting first to realize the power that I have in everything that I write. And it's the words are so meaningful. And if I use a certain verb or adjective over another one, completely changes the context. And obviously
100%.
People who are writing it from their experiences and their maybe even unconscious bias, if not conscious, depending on how they want to phrase it.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've realized too, with working with different publications is even if I submit something in a certain way that has truths that I would like for people to know because I was there and I saw this event and I experienced it and this is what was said. Once the editors get through it, 3 or 4 editors, there's the one copywriter makes sure all the grammar is good. Then there's another one who combs through the article. Then there's kind of a final one who checks to make sure everything's great. I realized that some of the pieces that I really wanted to have out there were taken out of the article because maybe it didn't match with the bias of the publisher at the time. And that really was curious to me because who knows why? Maybe the publisher took it out because they didn't agree with it, or maybe they felt like it would interfere with the relationship with advertisers that are funding the paper and giving everybody jobs. I mean, really, right? It's like we got to appease to what? The people who are publishing the paper, and they are trying to appease the advertisers. That is how a newspaper works.
And another one I would add on top of that, it is like a 3-pronged approach. I would say the people you're trying to reach, the advertisers, and the big one today is the algorithm. We do not know how Twitter, Facebook, or X now, Twitter, X, Facebook, or TikTok, how their algorithms work. Those are proprietary information. We don't know. And that's one of the things I'm always stressing to people about their media consumption. We should be more outraged about the fact that we are essentially being controlled about the information that comes into us. And the way news spreads on social media is heavily affected by these algorithms. So like you said, certain words, if you remove certain words or add certain words, it will totally change how your piece is going to show up in a timeline.
Yeah. Oh man. And this is what I love about this conversation and why I loved talking with you at Art Muse is that we come from our own experiences within media. And it's not that we are, as some people might say, leaning towards a conspiracy of like, this is what people are trying to control the message. It's like, no, we're actually witnessing it in real time. And that's why also I've said, I really love the fact that we can have conversations on a podcast because this is unfiltered. We're not edited. There's no editor telling us what's up, what we can say or cannot say. We can just speak from our hearts and our minds and say, this is how we've seen it in our experience. I hope this is helpful for you. And I really, really, really appreciate your transparency and especially talking about social media because that is so true. It's like, what are we trying to appease? Are we trying to do the attention headlines to make it go viral or are we trying to make an impact and really help people? I mean, what is,
And that's the thing. That's what I feel so lucky about my job is that, I work with very important high up people that I get a lot of respect for them. Like they respect where I'm coming from as like, they see me as like an expert in this. Like they're like, you see it every day, you're watching the trends, how it filters through. And I do, and I before I went into journalism, actually, I thought I wanted to do marketing. And I saw kind of from that standpoint, how SEO, search engine optimization works. And that kind of like is a piece of the puzzle in terms of like this whole keyword thing. But it really, when it comes together with social media and you see behind the curtain of how you write these words in to get your article to pop up different places, it ends the mystique is kind of gone. We're talking about having these conversations unfiltered. It's like it's really just the exposure to the tools, and once you get exposed to them, it takes some time and it's a lot of work and it's a specific field. But once you see it, you're like, well, I wish more people knew. I wish more people knew that a lot of what you're seeing is it basically just comes down to honestly luck in predicting the specific words, specific headlines, what's going to click with audiences, what's going to click with the algorithm, and what's going to get engagement. And as we see, kind of the issue with disinformation and with social media algorithms is the most engagement comes from things that create a lot of emotion in people, and it tends to be the most engagement tends to come from anger. And so when you're seeing things online and it's making you feel a certain way, you have to remember that that's the goal of what you're seeing. It's there to make you feel that way. Like it is, like that's why it's successful. There's so many different books on this that are currently on shelves. I've been reading this one called, I think it's called The Death of Truth, and that the guy who wrote that, he started this site called NewsGuard. People can talk about left or right leaning. He started, like, he's a more left leaning guy and he started it with a right leaning guy. They tried to come in with the least amount of bias. If you work for that organization, you have to sign a contract that says you're not going to contribute to political funds and you're not going to express any kind of political takes on social media. You're going to be as neutral as possible. And, even through that, he was talking about how his whole goal at that company is to help people understand, like the research is there. When you see stuff online, it is very likely to try and get an emotional response out of you, especially on social media. So it's out there. It's a very known thing. And I see it every day.
Absolutely. Whew, I feel heated just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because it is such a control issue. And honestly, it's, they can, control slash get our attention by using the anger and then fear. And really it's, it's entertainment. At some point it becomes just entertainment, even though that doesn't feel like it is, but it is, because they're grabbing your attention. They're like, do. Here's the news.
Yeah,
This is what
exactly.
keep you tuned in. So so good. Okay. So on that note, and I know you might not be able to go into specifics too much, but what topics or areas do you specialize in? And they give you a topic like, hey, this is what we want to talk about here. Please look into this.
I look at, well, like I said, I have to look at everything, that's coming across. And I'm mostly tend to focus on, like, foreign affairs, and things that would probably directly affect the US military. And it gets really broad. Like some of my my headings for where I slot in articles are just Russia, Ukraine, things like that. But these topics are really broad and involve a lot of, European appeal and US appeal. So it's a lot of international involvement. I'm looking at stuff that's like, really big picture updates on the Ukraine war. But then in addition to that, I'm also looking at, what we call dynamic security environment in Europe. All that really means is like, what are big issue topics that are affecting, people's everyday security. One of the big ones was the flooding in Valencia, Spain, talking about climate change issues occasionally, and how this could affect the military. One of the big things is the melting ice caps in the Arctic. In the Arctic Circle, and that's becoming, a big security issue for Europe and for us. So I'm looking at like a really, really broad section of the news. And like I said, like sometimes there are things that bubble up that aren't as related, but I go with the trends. I will tell them, like, if everyone's talking about a certain issue, and even if it's like kind of tangentially related, I throw it in. I'm looking at everything. If a person in Europe is reading the news, I'm seeing it. So
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
so incredible to have that broad awareness of everything, and to see it from the lens that you do. I'm wondering about your communication style when you are delivering this information to your superiors, or I don't know if that word is even the right, I don't even know if I like that word, honestly, to your clients. Is it, journalism and writing has so many different styles. You have your own voice, you have the voice of a journalist, and wondering, is the communication style to your, what would you like to say? Clients? How
I
would you
usually
word?
say clients, I'm technically delivering them in the like official part wording of my job. I'm delivering them a product
There we
technically,
go. Okay.
because it's like a daily product that I produce is what they
Mm-hmm.
call it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Uh, so what am
Yeah.
I?
So I guess I'm wondering, when you communicate with them, do you write it like it's
Oh,
a journalism article? Do you write it like a PowerPoint, or do you kind of give them notes verbally? How does that work?
I would say it leans more towards like there's two sections. The one where I'm just kind of, curating articles is like a Word doc, so it comes in like a morning briefing, like a newsletter. You can wake up and read, from my perspective, what would be a great, summary of news if you want to be well informed, a really balanced perspective. And then when I write, it's more like a PowerPoint briefing in that regard. And I do have to be pretty direct in that, because I don't have a lot of space. They don't want like a ton of writing. This is something that they're just seeing daily to kind of get them up to speed, especially in the PR area, or people that need to know just like the general trends from day to day. So, I'll pick like maybe 2 to 3 bigger topics and kind of dive into, what's the major themes that we're seeing, what's the tone of reporting, what kind of outlets are running it. Is this something that we're only seeing in Europe? Is it more regional? Is it really broad? And like, what's the volume of reporting? So I kind of like go through that checklist of, you know the basics, and then I talk about how it's being interpreted as well. If there are difference based on like, most often I have to look at like, North American and European audience views versus what people in Russia are seeing on the same topic. So I like to pull that perspective a lot. um, and then off of that, I write a really concise summary. What I try to do in that is connect broader themes, even like, so basically I take a lot of reporting, I find the broad themes, and I connect it to like really central idea that I can sum up in 150 words about that day. So that one I usually have to, write my analysis. I walk away for a second and I'm like, okay, let me just let those ideas marinate, and then I'll find some connections. I don't necessarily have to do that every day if it's a pretty basic day and it's on one thing. But a lot of times, what you'll see in the news is like a lot of these issues are interconnected around a central event or a central motivation behind a country. So a lot of like, just watching everything come together, and then I pick up those pieces and put the puzzle together for everyone.
I just took notes this whole time. I really appreciate that because it can be so overwhelming. I'm even thinking about, looking at different science, environmental, all the articles out there about fishing. And it's like, okay, when you want to help deliver data and you're not sure where to start, it can feel really overwhelming. And I really love the
Yes.
fact that you said PowerPoint, because another woman that I interviewed who works in the North Carolina Coastal Commission, she was talking about how she was able to communicate their ideas, and it was the PowerPoint. It was something that I wouldn't have thought of immediately, but it makes sense that it's visual, it can be concise, you're able to speak over it and show them ideas in the background, and it could be more
Yeah.
effective because they get that visual and auditory information.
Absolutely. And it forces you, I think, especially when you're talking about a science perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of my friends are in science fields. I have, a friend who does marine biology at NOAA. I have a friend who works at one of the telescopes on the top of Mauna Kea. I have a lot of friends in science. So my partner is a submarine officer, and works with, nuclear reactors. I kind of thrive with people who are equally as nerdy as I am in that regard. And what I find about people in this field is that you love data and you want to give all the data you possibly can. And I think if I were given like a more free reign, on this contract, I would probably gravitate towards more data driven stuff. But then at the same time, it's like, I think the PowerPoint is a great restraint, especially in the slides and, having a set amount. It really focuses you to, create those bigger ideas and makes it more approachable. You can show people, like, oh, look, here's all these articles that are talking about this. We'll put them at the end and cite them. It's great to cite your sources. But if you are trusted among, the people you're presenting to or giving this information to, they're going to trust you to distill the correct information down. And, having a limiting factor is not necessarily a bad thing. That's what I think.
I love this. Okay. Total notes, writing all these down. Okay. So if I remember correctly, you can speak several languages.
I can speak a decent amount. So I grew up, actually all my first words were Spanish, which is kind of funny. I had all like Spanish picture books, but I'm half Cuban. And my dad got a little bit lazy, and then I kind of went to this point of like not really speaking it, but it was always around growing up. My abuela are in the same hometown as where I grew up in Olympia, Washington. And just that exposure all the time. I remember when I took Spanish in high school, it really clicked when I was like, wait, why is everyone else struggling with this? Like, I wouldn't study for the tests. I would fly through the homework. And I was like, oh, it's because it was always there. So my Spanish is pretty good now. I went to Argentina a few months ago, met up with a friend. And after about a day, I was able to, ask people about the political situation in Spanish and have like, a pretty much like 80% understood conversation. I would say like I had a little more informal training in my Spanish. And then with Danish is where I did the major. I am not Danish. I would say my mom is actually mostly Norwegian, but Danish and Norwegian are pretty similar in their language structure. Norwegian's actually kind of called baby Danish. Some of my friends in Denmark would call it that. It's actually the easiest language for English speakers to pick up. I think you only need to know about 8,000 words to like be fluent in it, and the grammar structure is very easy. Same cannot be said for Danish. I think there's about 26 vowel sounds and there's no rules to the pronunciation. And I learned that after I majored in it. It's very, very difficult for me to understand Danish because of these like very closed mouth sounds. I'm much better at reading it. But I will say one of the best things that learning languages has given me is kind of comes into the translation aspect, translation of media, but also I think just knowing language and knowing how translation works and knowing how things can get mistranslated between languages helps you understand also that structure and just like in basic, basic English structure, grammar structure, and how, like we were talking about, changing words or changing just little things can completely change what you're reading. So yeah, I think I'm always telling people that one of the greatest skills is just learning a language. And this sounds weird, but after your first, the subsequent ones become easier. It's like your brain knows how to, how to synthesize it, and it will just get faster every time. The only thing that is hard though, I remember when I was in Danish classes in Denmark, I had a teacher who was he was half Spanish, half Danish. And I remember one time he spoke to me in Danish and out of nowhere, I just replied in Spanish. And he looks at me and then he starts speaking Spanish. And I was like, oh my God. And he's like, you know what? It happens. It's kind of like the same part of your brain knows how to do that. And that's where it's all being stored. So when someone comes up to me, it's like, oh, can you say this in this language? It's like I need a second. I need a second to untangle everything. Like I called my abuela called yesterday and she just accidentally just started speaking Spanish to me right off the bat. And I understood her, but I was like, oh wait, her Cuban Spanish is so fast. I'm like, abuela, like I understood that. She's like, oh, did I start speaking in Spanish? I'm like, yeah. So it happens to all of us. It's a really interesting little skill I've found. Like I didn't even know I had this in me, but I think that's kind of what happens. I'm sure you kind of feel that way with Spanish being in your background, but it's just kind of always there. Absolutely. And I feel very lucky and privileged to have had that growing up.
Oh, I love that so much. Yes, Spanish. I can speak very basic. And I, when I pick it up again, I'm like, oh, okay, I do know more than
Yeah.
I know, or I'll dream about it and I'll say something in Spanish and I'll wake up. I'm like, yes, it is in there. I will remember, but I would like to one day just go to a Puerto Rico. I mean, that's where I'd like to go and just have an
Yeah.
immersion for months and just finally nail the language down and celebrate the culture. I mean, that's our Caribbean
Yes.
culture. It's like, hello.
I'm with you. Every time I go, like I have some family friends in Spain and I've spent a long time with them and like on different trips, and I'll go and I'll feel really overwhelmed the first day because they don't know any English. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then after about 3 days, and I'm like, okay, I understand everything they're saying. It's definitely what I remind people too is like you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna start understanding, but you feel really bad about not being able to reply in the best way. It's a lot harder to speak it perfectly and reply. But in my cases where you get immersed in a language or at least putting your best foot forward, people understand what you're saying. Like my grammar is not great in Spanish, but what matters is just, participating in it and putting yourself out there. It's scary, but it's worth it.
I love it. Inspiration for anybody out there wanting to dive into their culture. You can do it. It starts with
Yes.
just learning a few words and then you'll pick it up. You got this. Okay. So wondering, this is kind of a funny question considering how incredibly layered that your job is, but what aspect or type of advising do you find most difficult?
Oh, you know, this is maybe not a typical response. I find like I have like an assistant who works with me. I find my most difficult part of my job is just communicating with him and setting my expectations with him. He has a lot less experience in this field than I do. I but that's okay. Part of the requirements for this job is that you have to have a security clearance, which this is kind of complicated. My old company had paid for it for me, and then there's the way that government contracts work is that they get transferred between a lot of companies all the time. So it got transferred to this new company. They didn't want to pay for it because it is very expensive, and I had to hire someone who had it. And he didn't really have journalism experience. So the goal was for me to essentially teach him journalism 101 to be able to do this job. And he had pretty basic writing skills. So I think like the hardest part in like advising in this role is actually just the interpersonal relationships. When you have been my first time, being a supervisor. And it's really difficult because I want to give him, I feel like I was very lucky when I first started this role, my old supervisor who kind of trained me in the same way, gave me a lot of freedom to, hone my own workflow and kind of learn by doing. And I let him do that, but trying to figure out where I needed to like step in was really difficult. And even still sometimes, he'll get off track, even though he's been working on this for 2 years and he's come a long way. Sometimes I'll just see something and it gets off track, or he won't proofread, little things that are like key for this. And I ultimately trust him, but then, he'll get a little bit too relaxed. Things slip through the cracks. And then I have to go to the people at UCOM when they find, something significant that's made it through the cracks because I took a day off, and, kind of talk about that. So I would say, like I don't like having to own up to things that happen sometimes, because I think communicating to military men, who are in this role that we are not, we're only human is really important. And having to supervise someone has really like made me have to confront that and communicate it like to a further degree, because I make mistakes sometimes. And so I feel very lucky to have my point of contact in Europe be like so understanding and so good. And so but it is sometimes when things happen, you have like thousands of people who are reading this, and they will point out when something's wrong. And just being able to take the feedback and know it's not personal and understand that you are working as a team, and you're going to have to be understanding when you catch each other's faults as well. So yeah. That's something I really had to learn. It's like a really small contract. It's just him and I. But even then, working together is not always easy.
Absolutely. That is so relatable. I'm sure lots of partners see this not only, in their own careers, but speaking to their fishermen, speaking to their children, speaking, or even fishermen and deckhands, that relationship of understanding like what to do, who's doing what, if you hire somebody new, how to re-explain the entire process of how you specifically fish. Wow. That's totally relatable. Thank you for sharing that. It's like, even though you're a communication expert on one side, that interpersonal human experience is a constant work in progress, right? We're all.
Yeah. I get a lot of advice from my dad on it. He's been working for the state of Washington government for 40 years, and he's the PR guy for the Department of Social and Health Services. So, he's also in communication like me, just on a different level. And I'll call him and I'm like, how do you manage people? Because he has a whole team, and he's like, you know what, 40 years with the state, that is still my hardest part of the job, and it makes me feel better when I understand that. My boyfriend will say the hardest part of being deployed in the submarine was, working with everyone there, all the interpersonal relationships. So I think it's important to remember, like, we're all people, we're all human, we're all going to have a different perspective, and having patience and understanding is not a bad virtue or quality to have,
Totally. I love that. Yes, we all give ourselves grace, however we want to put it. That patience point, so true. That's it for today, y'all. Tune in next week where we finish this incredibly juicy, valuable conversation with Gabriela Capestany. I know you guys will love it. If you love this episode, you're definitely going to want to tune into next week's. It's just so good. Thank you so much for being here. So appreciate y'all. Let's continue this chat next week. Till then. Thank you so much for listening. To support our community, I'd so appreciate it if you tap the subscribe button to this podcast or write a review. And if you're a POCF who wants to connect further, go to POCFpride.com for weekly vlogs and to learn about opportunities to join our private communities. We'd love to have you.